Now that you have a construct to measure, as well as the dimensions of the said construct, the next step in your journey to test development is item writing. In this video, we are going to talk about, or we are going to define what we mean by when we said item, and we are going to explore several item formats. We are going to talk about the prerequisites of writing items, and as well as the characteristics of a good item. Lastly, in order for you to be able to write your items well, we are going to look at some general guidelines for item writing. Now, in the grand scheme of test construction, considerations related to the actual writing of the test items go hand in hand with scaling consideration. The prospective test developer, that's you, or the item writer, that's also you, immediately faces three questions related to the test blueprint. What range of content should the items cover? This pertains to what are the dimensions that we have to cover in our test. Which of the many different types of item formats should be employed? Should we use multiple choice items? Should we use a test format that only has two choices? Should you use Likert type scales? Should you use checklist and some other test formats. Lastly, you have to ask yourself how many items should be written in total for each content area covered. Should each dimension have equal number of items, or are there dimensions that have that carry more weight than other dimensions? So um, when devising a standardized test using a multiple choice format or a Likert type scale, it is usually advisable that the first draft contain approximately twice the number of items that the final version of the test will contain. For example, a test called Filipino Psychology History from 1940 to 2000s is to have 30 questions in its final version. It would be useful to have as many as 60 items in your item pool. Ideally, these items will adequately sample the domain of the test. An item pool is the reservoir or the well from which items will or will not be drawn from the final version of the test. Now, let's look at some item formats. When we say item formats, these are the variables such as form, the plan, the structure, the arrangement, and layout of individual test items. There are a number of formats out there, but we are only going to talk about four of the common test formats. We are going to talk about dichotomous format, polytomous format, checklists, and the Likert type format. Now, when we say dichotomous format, it's a test that offers it's a test item that offers two alternatives for each item. For example, you have true or false in an examination, or a yes or no, the presence of or absence of a particular trait. So it's good for sampling a great deal of content in a relatively short time. These tests consist of such items. Tests consisting of such items is relatively easy to construct and score, and it can actually be machine scored because it's relatively easy to be scored, you know. Now, what are some of its disadvantages? It's actually susceptible to guessing in high, guessing. It's actually susceptible to guessing because there are all guessing will actually give you 50% chance of getting the right answer. Now, students who may detect cues to reject one choice or the other, and then Some wordings, including the use of adverbs such as typically or usually, can be interpreted differently by different students or test takers. It can be used only when a choice of dichotomous response uh, can be made without any qualification. And we know that in the real world, there is rarely just two choices. Okay, much of our choices, much of the variables that we encounter on a daily basis have a gray area in between the two extremes. Now, because of this, test developers offer polytomous format as an option to dichotomous format. When we say polytomous format, it resembles the dichotomous format, except that each item has more or has two or more alternatives. It is good for sampling a great deal of content in relatively short time, like that of the dichotomous format, and it follows or it allows precise interpretation and little bluffing other than guessing. Now, this in turn may allow for more content valid test score interpretation than some other formats like the dichotomous format, and it may also be machine or computer scored. Well, the disadvantage includes it does not allow for the expression of original or creative thought, and not all subject matter lends itself to reduction to one and only one and keyed correct answer. And it may be time consuming to construct series of good items. Uh, so the advantages of this format may be nullified if item is poorly written or if any pattern of correct alternative is discerned by the test taker. So now let's move on to checklists. And when we say checklist, it's when subjects receive a long list of adjectives and indicate whether each one is characteristic of himself. Now, lastly, we are going to look at Likert type format. Now, the Likert type format, I'm not mispronouncing this. It's actually pronounced as Likert, not Likert. So Likert type format is actually the most widely used approach to scaling response in survey questions or in survey research. It requires that a respondent indicate the degree of agreement with a particular attitudinal question. For example, you have a question or a statement like, I like ice cream, and the respondent may choose between uh, strongly disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. Now, the scale is named after its inventor, the psychologist named Rensis Likert. Now, Likert distinguished between a scale proper, which emerges from collective responses to a set of items, usually eight or more, and the format in which responses are scored along a range. Technically speaking, when you say Likert scale, you only refer to the former. The difference between these two concepts has to do with the distinction Likert made between the underlying phenomenon being investigated and the means of capturing variations that points to the underlying phenomenon. Therefore, the difference between what we call a Likert type scale and a full-blown Likert scale is that the Likert type scale only uses 5 points or 7 or 8 or whatever you prefer to answer on a single question. A full-blown Likert scale, on the other hand, uses a series of statements to explore different dimensions of a subject. Now, the advantageous side of the Likert type scale is that they are the most universal method of survey collection. Therefore, they are easily understood. The responses are easily quantifiable and subjective to computation of some mathematical analysis. Since it does not require the participants to provide a simple and concrete yes or no, it does not force the participant to take a stand on a particular topic, but allows them to respond in a degree of agreement. Now, this makes the question answering easier on the respondent. Also, the responses presented accommodate neutral or undecided feelings of participants. These responses are easy to code when accumulating data since a single number represents the participant's response. Likert type scales are also quick, efficient, and inexpensive methods for data collection. They have high versatility and can be sent out through mail, over the internet, or given in person. Now, attitudes of the population for one particular item in reality exist on a vast multidimensional continuum. However, the Likert type scale is unidimensional and only gives 5 to 7 to 9 options to 10 options of choice, and the space between each choice cannot be possibly be equidistant. Therefore, it fails to measure the true attitudes of respondents. Also, it is unlikely that people's answers will be influenced by previous questions or will heavily concentrate on one response side, agree or disagree. Frequently, people avoid choosing the extreme options on the scales because of the negative implications involved with extremists. Even if an extreme choice would be the most accurate. So, in the context of this subject, the scale that we are going to develop should follow the Likert type format. Now, there are some essential prerequisites which must be met if the item writer wants to write good and appropriate items. These requirements include a command on the subject matter. The item writer must have a thorough knowledge and complete mastery of the subject matter or the construct being measured. In other words, they must be fully acquainted with all the facts, principles, and even misconceptions and fallacies in a particular field so that they may be able to write good and appropriate items. This means that you need to immerse in deep research regarding your topic. Number two, the item writer should have complete familiarity of the population. The item writer must be fully aware of those persons whom the test is meant for. He must also be aware of the intelligence level of those persons so that he may manipulate the difficulty level of the items for proper adjustment with their ability level. He must also be able to avoid irrelevant clues to correct responses. Moreover, the item writer should be familiar with different types of items. The item writer must be familiar with different types of items along with their advantages and disadvantages. You must also be aware of the characteristics of a good test and the common probable errors in item writing. Now, the person or the item writer must also have a large vocabulary. This pertains to a command on the language. He must know the different meanings of a word so that confusion in writing the items may be avoided. He must also be able to convey the meaning of the items in the simplest possible language. Lastly, after writing down the items, they must be submitted to a group of subject experts. And we will do this, we are going to look for experts who will content validate your tools. So, this should be done for criticism or suggestions, which must be duly modified if the validator sees fit. Now, there are also a number of things that we have to consider in item writing according to Kaplan and Sakuzo. So, number one, you have to realize that personality and intelligence tests require different sorts of responses. Also, you must be sensitive to ethnic and cultural differences. Some constructs that may be present in one culture doesn't mean that just because one construct exist in one culture or in a specific culture doesn't mean that the said construct will also exist in another culture, or a particular construct may be expressed in a different manner uh, with regards to looking at two cultures. So you have to be sensitive with this. You have to realize that there are ethnical and cultural constructs that can be measured only in a particular culture. Also, uh, you have to note that items that retain their reliability are more likely to focus on skills, while those that lost reliability or lose reliability focuses on more abstract concepts. So you have to consider this when you are writing your items. Now, Kaplan and Sakuzo offered some guidelines for writing your items. Number one, you have to provide a clear definition of what you want to measure. This should be provided prior to the development of your item so that you would be guided in your item writing. You also have to generate an item pool. So this means you don't if you want to develop a 30 item test, you have to develop like an item pool of 60 a pool of 60 items or even more. You have to avoid exceptionally long items and keep the level of reading difficulty appropriate for those who will complete the scale. So you will have to consider the age of the person as well as the developmental level the person is in writing your items. You also have to avoid what we call double-barreled items. They convey two or more ideas at the same time. So, an example of double-barreled question is goes like this: I like ice cream. I like ice cream. I like them, or I like eating ice cream, and I like eating them during summer. So that's a double barreled question because they convey it, or the said sentence or the said item conveys two or more ideas. First one is the statement whether or not the person likes ice cream. The second statement or the second idea is whether or not the person likes eating ice cream during summer. So the problem here is that when the person answers agree, or there might be a confusion on which of the said items, on which of the said statement the person should agree. An answer, if the person answers agree, then for the test, for the item writer, it may appear that the person agreed on both of the statements. So, in order to avoid this, you should write items that convey only one idea at the same time, no? So, you also have to consider mixing positively and negatively worded items. So, let us explore characteristics of a good item. An item must have the following characteristics. It must have clarity. An item should be phrased in such a manner that there is no ambiguity regarding its meaning for both the item writer as well as the examinees or the test takers. Also, it should be clear in reading. It should not present any difficulty in reading, and it should not encourage guesswork. As far as possible, it should not encourage guesswork from the participant. Now, it must also have discriminating power. That is, it must clearly distinguish between those who possess the trait and those who do not possess the trait, and that they should be independent from each other. Each item should be independent from another. So it should not be such that its meaning is dependent upon another item, and or it can be answered by referring to another item only. So these are the characteristics of a good item. Now, let us move on to some guidelines or general guidelines for item writing. So you have to consider that writing item is a matter of precision. It is perhaps more like computer programming than writing a prose. So the task of the item writer is to focus the attention of a large group of examinees varying in background experience, environmental exposure, and ability level on a single idea. Such a situation requires extreme care in choice of words. The item writer must keep in view some general guidelines which are essential for good item writing. So this includes the clarity of the item. So clarity in item test, in writing item, in test in writing test item is one of the main requirements for an item to be considered good. It must be written as a verbal puzzle, or rather, it must not be written as a verbal puzzle. They must be able to discriminate between those who are competent and those who are not. This is possible only when the item have been written in a simple and clear language. The items must not be must not be test of examinees' ability to understand the language. It must not be a test of reading comprehension. So the item writer should be very cautious, particularly in writing the objective item, because each such item provides more or less an isolated bit of knowledge, and there the problem of clarity is more serious. If the objective item is a vague one, it will create difficulty in understanding, and the validity of the item will be adversely affected. Vagueness in writing items must be maybe because of several reasons such as poor thinking and incompetence of the item writer. You also have to avoid non-functional words. So non-functional words must not be included in the items as they tend to lower the validity of the item. Non-functional words refer to those words which makes no contribution towards the appropriate and correct choice of the response by the examinees. So such words are often included by the item writer in an attempt to make the correct answer less obvious or to provide a good distractor. So also the use of stereotype words either in the stem or in the alternative response must be avoided because they facilitate rote learning in guessing the correct answer. Moreover, such stereotyped words fail to discriminate between those who really know and understand the subject and those who do not. Thus, stereotyped words who do not possess or words do not provide an adequate and discriminatory measure of index. The most obvious ways of getting rid of search getting rid of such word is to paraphrase the words in a different manner so that those who really know the answer can pick up the meaning. So irrelevant cues must also be avoided. These are sometimes provided in several forms, such as clang association, verbal association, length of the answer, keeping a different foil among homogeneous foils, giving the same order of the correct answers, etc., and so on and so forth. In general, such clues tend to decrease the difficulty level of the item because they provide an easy route to the correct answer. The common observation is that examinees who do not know the correct answers choose any of these irrelevant clues and answer on that basis. The item writer must therefore take special care to avoid such irrelevant clues. Specific determiners like never, always, all, none must also be avoided because they are also irrelevant clues to the correct answer, especially in two alternative answers. Lastly, interlocking items must be avoided too. Interlocking items, also known as interdependent items, are items that can be answered only by referring to other answers or to other items. In other words, when responding correctly to an item is dependent upon the correct response of any other item. The item constitutes an the item constitutes that you need, or rather, interlocking items constitute that you need to answer a particular item correctly in order for you to be able to answer another item correctly. So, this ends our lesson on item writing. The next step that you have to do in our journey to test development is to have your items validated by a content validator or an expert. Thank you for listening, and or thank you for watching, and have a great day.